Good morning, everybody. Kiara. I want to start from a place of gratitude. Gratitude for Amarjeet, Jazz, and the Collaborative Etora team, without whom I wouldn't be able to join you today. And I have met so many wonderful people while I'm here. I am going home full of wisdom. My heart is full. And I look forward to a visit back in the future. Before I get underway, I wanted to let you know that I am joining you from my home, which is located on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. It is home to Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Métis peoples. I give thanks to the generations of Indigenous peoples who have been such wonderful stewards of this land that I am blessed to call home. I live at the headwaters of 5 river systems that replenish the Great Lakes in Canada. And this land is colonially known as Caledon, Ontario. It is a rural community about 1.5 hours northwest of Toronto, for those of you who have visited our country or will in the future. For those of you who know nothing about Tamarack, we are a Canadian charity. We've been around for about 23 years, and our focus is on building capacity for both community and systems level change. And I'm going to talk about that in more depth. And one of the things that we really see our role as being is a catalyst for local communities. And over our history, we have now had the privilege to partner with local communities to build national networks of locals that are focused on advancing change on a number of key complex issues. You'll see the list there. Around eradicating poverty, building youth futures, fostering a sense of belonging, and most recently, supporting local communities to translate the Sustainable Development Goals into just and equitable local action plans. What I would like to do today is really talk to you about this, about the fact that the current context in which we are living today, because of the interconnected and complex issues confronting every one of us, is a time of uncertainty. And we don't like uncertainty, at least I don't, like to pretend that uncertainty is something we can control. But what you'll see is historically the metaphor with which most of us have been taught to engage these issues is the metaphor of the well-oiled machine. If we can figure out the right pieces and click them all together, we'll have solved the problem. But in fact, increasingly, we need to embrace a different metaphor, a living metaphor, because really communities are nothing more than a living lab for social change and experimentation. So embrace the metaphor of the forest, with its uncertainty, with its beautiful cyclical emergence. We need to stay open. We need to not shy away from the fact that we don't know the answer. We just need to up our game in how we approach these issues. As I've been crisscrossing North America, one of the things that I'm realizing is if there are silver linings to COVID, one of them is that there is absolutely a growing consensus that our traditional ways of doing things aren't working. And that's fabulous. What an opportunity. Here's the problem. Just because there is a consensus that we need to fundamentally change does not automatically translate into any kind of consensus about what that change should look like, right? The other tension is that the fields that we are all working in, people rely desperately on the services and programs we deliver. They are imperfect, but they're necessary. And so the challenge before all of us is how might we fundamentally reimagine the future, a completely different approach, and simultaneously keep doing the work we know that our communities and our families rely on. And that's difficult. What we've learned, though, and this is a shout out to Meg Wheatley. I don't know how many of you are Meg Wheatley fans, but one of the things that I really appreciate is she talked about this notion of paradigm pioneers. I'm not sure I like that term, a bit colonial for me. But I do think she recognizes that the best way to reconcile that tension of currently delivering service while recognizing new approaches being needed is we need small groups of passionate people who are the trailblazers. They go out, they experiment, they find promising solutions that might help us move to this new future. And then they are able to bring back that wisdom to communities and help them bridge the path to new, more promising solutions. A bias that we at Tamarack bring is that communities are an important superpower. They are an unappreciated, unleveraged superpower many times, but they are the most powerful engines for social change and transformation. Communities and community innovation is distinct from, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, distinct from continuous improvement. It's a fundamental reimagining of what's needed. We've discovered that place matters. What that means is the unique context of each place, the wisdom, the leaders, the assets, the strengths of one community are quite different from another. So while a great idea from one community may serve as an inspiration to another, it doesn't allow us to just cookie cutter transplant that idea. We have to blend it together what we know of our own community. We also know that new ideas are much more likely to emerge when we bring together multiple perspectives to create a shared action plan that is honoring of the collective wisdom and knowledge of many. Because as we share those multiple kind of perspectives, together we create a richer, much more nuanced understanding of the dynamics of our community, and therefore are much more likely to create a powerful solution. What I'd like to do is really highlight, though, and what we've learned, is that what you do externally is in some ways less important than the changes that we need to embrace internally if we're going to be champions of this new approach for navigating uncertainty. There are 4 shifts in thinking that I really want to highlight for you today, and here they are. The first is appreciating complexity and how we adapt to it, how we think about it. The second is the need to not only focus on programmatic solutions, but also look at the systems that we actually have created and what strategic changes are needed there. We want to reimagine who leads. And lastly, we need to embrace this notion of community innovation, and I'll unpack each one of these now. So, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. This is a framework developed by a fellow from the UK known as David Snowden. And one of the things that's really powerful is he helps us tease out that when we're looking at a problem, not all problems are the same. And so before we go leaping into trying to fix them, we need to stand still and figure out what dimensions of this problem are simple, i.e. we already know what the answer is and how to fix it. Great example, hand washing to reduce the spread of disease. It does not matter if you are here in Wellington or if you are in Caledon, Ontario. If you do it, it's going to work. And so those are known, and that's fantastic. But often we're faced with complicated problems. So these are problems that require technical solutions. We can figure them out, but they don't happen quickly. They are often made up of a series of discrete parts we need to click together. Best example, putting on a play. Every play we do has key elements we need to figure out. We need the cast, we need the script, we need the director, we need the sets, the lights, the props, the costumes, the lighting, the marketing. Every play we do, we've got to figure out what each one of those parts look like. But boy, oh boy, if we can fit them together, then we're much better able to keep that solution running. The third type of problem the one that we are now facing more often than not, is in the realm of complexity. What makes complex problems unique and different is that the pieces aren't standing still. They're dynamic, they're ever-changing, and the relationship between the things is as important as solving the thing itself. How many of you are parents? Are you parents to more than one child? Don't know about you, but our first child, Gabriella, was this beautiful blessing that was incredibly introverted, incredibly intelligent. You could plunk her in her crib and she would read books for an hour. You know what that meant, right? John and I are brilliant parents. Arrogant as all get out, the universe sent us our second child, a son, Garrett. Garrett's nothing like Gabriella. Garrett ran around the loop, from living room to dining room to kitchen, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly, John and I are thinking, what is this? We thought we were good parents. We're doing all the same things we did with Gabriella, and it's not working, right? Plus, it's the dynamic now we are parents of two, and we can't give each child the full attention, right? So that's a problem. We have to adapt. There is no simple recipe for how to be a good parent. You need to adapt that to reflect the changing dynamic of your family and the unique contributions and gifts that each child represents. We thought we had it nailed with Garrett and Gabriella, and then the universe sent us Sean. Anyone else have an experiential learner? I remember my dear friend looking at me and saying, if that boy lives safely to being 18, and by the way, he's almost 18, you and John deserve medals. Right? So it's good to be kept humble. Here's what we know. We also know that our current approaches to tackling problems aren't going to help us address the nature of a complex problem. And that, in fact, as much as we would love to think there is one silver bullet we could find that will fix this issue, 9 times out of 10, it's more like silver buckshot. It's more like a series of interesting experiments that are loosely linked together and create collectively a leverage for change. So, again, this is why we believe multi-sector collaboration is a must in these situations. Because what happens when we bring diverse perspectives together is our own mental models and assumptions about what the issue is, what the cause is, what the solution is, are going to be challenged. And that's a good thing, because the richer the perspective, the more options and opportunities for action, the more possibilities we can see. So that's the first. Here's the second shift, a focus on programs and systems. I remember working with John Kania. Many of you may recognize the name, and he is one of the authors of the Collective Impact Framework. And he said, we keep investing in programs and being totally pissed off that the system doesn't change. And frankly, that's not fair. We need programs, yes, but if our systems need to change, we need to be intentional about creating systems change strategies alongside our programmatic ones. So what does that really mean? I think we need to see that almost all our social problems are entrenched in the systems that we ourselves have created, and we pretend we have no authority or ability to shift. I would challenge that assumption. They're put in place and kept in place by myth, by narratives that we tell ourselves. And systemic solutions, actually, the things that will shift the way in which our systems hold these problems in place, are what we need to create. Karen Pittman, Forum for Youth Investment, gives us what I think is one of the best definitions of the distinction, right? A programmatic solution will help an individual or a family beat the odds, but a systemic situation shifts the odds for everyone. And we need both. We're really good at programmatic, less good at systems. Our friends at FSG have done a really nice job of making what a system solution looks like very concrete. At the very surface level, what we see are changes in programs. We see changes in funding flows. We see changes in policy, and that might be an organizational policy as much as it is a legislative policy at either level. At a less obvious level, but equally important, we start to see shifts in power. We see shifts in relationships and trust. And ultimately, the nirvana that we're hoping to get to is that we have so shifted people's attitudes and understanding of an issue such that they forget that it was ever any different. Think about how we react to smoking, right? Today, anybody else seen Oppenheimer? Everybody's smoking in the lab. My kids are going, oh my gosh, did people really smoke like that all the time? Yes. But see how we've shifted perception? That's kind of what we got to get to. One of my mentors, a fabulous woman named Frances Wesley, I think has given us some really concrete actions that if we are going to be system activists, we need to understand. We need to find our allies. One of the things I love about today and this room is there is such a diversity of people. And the capacity then to find unusual partners is very high. Looking for pressure points. Where is there vulnerability in the system? Where is there anxiety that new solutions are needed? Way easier to introduce something innovative there than something that's humming well, right? We want to be positive. We want to have empathy. No one ever set out to do work in a way that caused harm. None of us. But yet we're doing it, right? And so how can we be truthful and yet compassionate? We need to sow lots of seeds. What's going to work in one community isn't going to work in another, so don't invest in one magic solution, right? And ultimately, internally, we need to be both persistent and flexible. Never let go of, I know this is a North American term, the North Star. That ultimate aspiration we have for our communities, and then let go of any attachment to it happening following a particular path. Here's our next one. Reimagine who leads. One of the things I love about your adaptive framework of collective action with communities is it actually creates the container to allow this kind of working and the unifying of the diverse strengths of communities and translate it into a shared action plan. I love that you've taken a proven framework and you've adapted it to recognize and honor the unique strengths and culture of this place. Good on you. This framework gives you what you need to help build an action plan. And let me warn you, for those of you who cling to a plan very tightly or a framework very tightly, just because you have this framework, it isn't a recipe. You are not going to be able to escape the messy of what it takes to take a framework like this and apply it in your particular place around your particular issue. I know people have been talking a lot about this expression, lived experience. The term we actually love to use instead is context expert. These are the people who know their place, how their place operates, what will and will not catch on in their place. And they are most often the folks on the front line of experiencing the very issues that we are trying to solve. They bring an essential perspective that we all need to consider and understand before we can even think about change. And alongside them, we also need to bring in our content experts, those subject matter experts who actually also have important contributions to bring around finding new solutions. I love this. Why is it that our mindset is one that values learned experience and discounts lived experience? So my challenge and question to you is, how might context expertise be more valued in how you do your work in community? Again, why is it that the people often with the least power are the ones that are closest to the problem? We need to find those people, and we need to look at the people who are not currently in the crisis of a problem, but are ones who have lived through it and now have some perspective and wisdom and leadership to bring as a result. How might you work in ways that allow them to share ownership for innovating the solution? I also want to help you kind of ingrain this by understanding the difference between buy-in and shared ownership. Buy-in is when a small group of us, off we go, we design the perfect solution, and then we bring it out and say, okay, we could do A or we could do B based on our focus group. What do you think? Shared ownership is bringing people around, exactly as Sarah and Megan talked about in their presentation yesterday, right at the beginning, and committing to a co-designed process to find solutions and learn together. Worked with this absolutely inspiring fellow named Michael McAfee from a group called Policy Link. And understanding that when we come to these tables that may perceive to have differences in power, we need to remind us all that the price of participation is contribution. Everybody's contribution is valued and necessary. So, what does that look like in practice? You need to be very mindful when you are bringing together organizational leaders and context experts. Context experts speak the language of story. The challenge is that systems respond to patterns and themes. So when you bring in an individual with lived experience, there is automatically a power dynamic, even with the best intention. Because what happens is I'm the only one who has to make myself vulnerable in front of all of you, these experts who've come in with the benefit of a network of colleagues behind you, a 5-year, like a clear mission and a clear strategy, right? And I get to lead with my deficits. I get to tell you how I've absolutely effed up my life. How uncomfortable is that? And even if you are compassionate as an organizational representative, when you hear this person's individual story, you can't act on it, right? You don't know what to do. The power comes. The investment needed is to bring people with that experience, these context experts together. We need them to share their stories with one another, and then we need to ask them to identify, in spite of their unique stories, what are those common patterns and themes that the system needs to hear? Then when the context expert shows up at the table, they have the same benefit the organizational folks have of a network of colleagues behind them, and they can share multiple stories. So they don't have you designing a system based on their own unique experience, which feels inauthentic and terrifying if you're the one who's meant to be that voice. I will tell you, let's see if I can get this to go. Here's some research. Global consulting firm McKinsey had an assignment contracted by rural regions across Australia about what's it going to take to revitalize rural regions. Look what they've concluded. If they had a choice between giving each rural region $20 million or giving each 50 million or each local region 2 million and 20 committed local leaders, they would pick the 2 and 20 every single time. I honestly do believe that ordinary people are the single greatest untapped resource we have. And given the complexity of what we're facing, we need them there. So the last piece I really want to touch on, I forgot that was there. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. It's a group out of Florida, Health Foundation, recognized that they could invest in acute care, which they had been doing till the cows came home, and it would make almost no difference in 6 areas across their county where actually social determinants of health were the #1 concern and issue. So what did they do? They boldly convinced their board that what they needed was a long-term investment strategy for each of these local communities. And we're talking $200,000 per year per community for 5 years, $1 million investment in every community. Before they launched their grant call, they spent a year doing capacity building with those local communities to help cultivate the necessary citizen leadership to kind of embrace this opportunity. And when they issued their grant call in these communities, the first rule was that no organization could apply. It had to be a network of citizens who had zeroed in on what they wanted to see happen. There were broad boundaries around different dimensions of social determinants of health, but ultimately the communities needed to decide. A local service organization could be the fiscal host of that money, but the message was clear. It wasn't the money of the organizations to dole out if they felt that what the citizens were needing was adequate or appropriate. It was the citizens' money to do with what they thought was needed in their communities. Really brave experiment. The challenge is you couldn't put the journey of these 6 communities on a standard timeline. They didn't follow a standard timeline. One community, fast out of the gate, lots of momentum, and then it might stall. Another community looked like nothing was happening, and all of a sudden it's leapfrogging ahead really powerfully. So the dilemma for the foundation was about 2 years in, their board, being good stewards, said, okay, we've been doing this experiment for a couple years now. We have an accountability to our donors. We actually have to evaluate what this is looking like. So they dust off their traditional evaluation plans that are all designed for programs, and they don't fit at all. So what does the Healthier Together gang do? They design a new framework. Here are some of the things that I love. They really started to understand and appreciate on the journey of a community taking ownership for its future. There are readiness signals, and here are some. Those ultimately move toward growth signals, and ultimately at the end move towards true transformational signals. And I love how they've been able to make these very concrete. These are the patterns that they've seen. The other thing they did was their evaluation framework documented 3 types of wins that they were seeing. Outcome wins, evidence that the lives of people in these communities was changing. Big difference for individuals or groups within the community. Second level of win that they looked for was an insight win. We now understand the nature of this issue in completely different ways than what we first thought they would be, and that's really important. And the last type of win that they tracked was how has the capacity of the community been strengthened, so that whatever the issue, the community was way better positioned to now tackle, come together across the leaders of that community and mobilize. Isn't that great? So what you need to understand, right, is that our traditional metrics for evaluating impact and progress aren't going to naturally fit. There's a great piece of work out of the UK called Community, the Power and Evidence. And what I love about that piece is they've done a beautiful job articulating what they call the evidence paradox. Community power is not something that typically funders and program evaluators look to. They don't want counts about that. They don't recognize that or value it. And so therefore, it never gets counted. Because it never gets counted, guess what? There's not a compelling case for why you would want to invest in it. So my challenge to you as you embark on this transformational way of being is to really help globally advance and address this paradox in powerful ways. The last, and in many ways for me the most important shift, is a recognition that we need to embrace community innovation. So for me, community innovation is now an imperative. We don't get a choice if we want to innovate or not. It's here. But what it means is a higher risk than implementing a best practice program. We're not necessarily going to, all funders are not necessarily going to join you on that journey. And so part of it is being strategic enough to say, what do we turn into a program, and how do we keep investing in and advancing our community innovation agenda? An innovative solution is something that generates a positive impact and fundamentally reimagines what's possible. It is distinct from, more ambitious, and certainly more uncertain than continuous improvement. So one of the powers of working across sector is it mitigates and shares the risk of failure. And if you are not failing at some of your innovation attempts, you're not innovating aspirationally enough. It requires us to understand not just deeply the issue that we are trying to address, but also really deeply understand our place and the people there. Honestly, engaging diverse people in a place, they are much more likely to get involved. If you imagine trying to fix climate change on a global scale, you become paralyzed, like deers in headlights. But if you bring it down to the practical, tangible level of a community, people then begin to see what they might do. And that's what you want. Don't stay up in theory. Anchor it. Anchor it in real, concrete actions and experimentations. And what I would say to you is we need to also be very clear that our communities need to be that driver. And that remember that place matters, and that we need to embrace processes that bring in those diverse stakeholders and invite the unique creativity and capacity within all of us to develop these new solutions. Worked with this incredible man who really is working in the space of design, social design. And one of the things he drew to our attention is we don't have a definition of what constitutes good in the context of social design. And so I'm grateful for him because he began to articulate what good looks like. And I think it's dead on. I want to remind you, this man is an incredible inspiration to me. He is renowned as one of Canada's most treasured social innovators. And one of the things that he reminds us is that human ingenuity in the face of adversity isn't some magic superpower that some of us get gifted with and others don't. It is inherent in who we are as a species. So remember that. That's what we need to encourage. When we talk about collective action with communities and working across sectors, a beautiful way to think about it is what we are doing is co-creating an innovation space that pulls people away from the day-to-day reactive delivering programs, services, and solutions and creates a protective space where we can think big, where we can get out of the rat race and start to reimagine together new things we can try. It helps us hold that dichotomy, right, of responding to current need and finding new solutions. Again, my friend, Al Admasky, the Canadian social innovator, looked at 100 years of Canadian history and wanted to understand, while there was no shortage of great ideas, how come most of them didn't come into anything real, but some really did. And what he discovered is that almost every successful community innovation was the result of a partnership between three types of innovators. The first Al called the disruptive innovator. He also called them the passionate amateur. This is the person inspired by love. This is the person who, it was their daughter, it was their son, it was their mother who was not supported. And boy, oh boy, are they ever determined that no other family should experience this. They become passionate advocates. They get lots of attention because they touch people's hearts. But actually, they don't get very far alone because people say, oh, what happened to Sylvia and her family? So tragic. We would love to be able to help her, but she just doesn't understand. Our hands are tied. This is the way the system is, forgetting that we were the ones who actually created that system, right? The woman who started Mothers Against Drunk Driving, her daughter was killed by a drunk driver who had had multiple convictions. and she was incensed. What made things even more painful was that the current legislative frameworks in terms of sentencing for drunk drivers were nowhere near what they needed to be. It was basically a slap on the wrist. In her despair, the only thing she could say when the man who killed her daughter was sentenced was, "From now on, I will bear witness. No other family will endure this without it being acknowledged. The next and every future case involving drunk driving, you will see me. I am the woman sitting in the front row, and I am wearing a red blouse." Do you know the very next court case that she went to in honoring her pledge? There were 20 other women already sitting in the front row, and every single one of them wore a red blouse, right? That's the power of that first innovator. They get way further when they link arms with what Al identifies as the second type of innovator. He called them a bridging innovator. The bridger plays a couple of important roles, right? They validate the disruptor. They say, yes, your story's important. The issue you are bringing forward deserves to be recognized. I am with you. And however painful the story is and compelling the story is about your daughter, it's not enough. How many other sons and daughters are being affected in our community by this issue? And you say the system needs to change. I don't disagree, but what's your idea? How would you change it? What needs to happen? So pushes that first innovator to be more concrete, be more specific, and at the same time uses their legitimacy and their network of relationships to validate the importance of the work of the disruptor. I look at many of your collaboratives. You are, in many ways, bridging innovators. And the magic of these two is much more effective. But the true change happens when they link arms with the third innovator. Al calls them the receptive innovator. I call them the closet rebel within the organization. They want to see change happen too, right? But they have to be surreptitious. They're an intrapreneur. They're an entrepreneur embedded in the organization or the system. And they do a couple of things. They befriend the other two. They validate the other two. And they give them coaching. So I know you want to, I can get you in front of our board. But if you wait till June, you've missed the boat. Because we'll have made our strategic decisions for the next 3 years by then. So I need you to be ready in February. And when you walk in the room, you're going to be faced with 10 people with stone faces. And I'm going to tell you before you walk in, 8 of them are already with you. So don't sweat. And the 2 that are not, here's what they're worried about. So really think about how you are going to bring that solution forward or address and acknowledge that concern. The other thing that the disruptor does is tills the soil, gets it ready for the message of the other 2 to land. How do they do that? Gee, I've been reading lots about drunk driving in our newspapers lately. Does our organization have a policy about how we would address drunk driving? Should we? What would our strategy be? What would our response be? So there's awareness building that is critical so that you do mobilize a response. Here's the important and challenging thing. We don't do a lot of community innovation. It's a different paradigm. And some of the challenges as you embark on innovation is that funding often arrives way too late. So you've got to actually invest in, and many of us don't have those spare resources to commit in advance to the time required to nurture an innovation. There's always, what happens too, is we're stuck in those frameworks, much like in Palm Beach, where our funders want us to, in advance, speak about our expected results and outcomes and our timeline. And innovation doesn't fit, right? And so what happens is even innovation grants often end up being the only way to meet that limited paradigm is that you do continuous improvement on a program you've already got, which is good, but not good enough. The other thing, so board members, particularly if they're of the business sector, love this notion of innovation finally coming to human services, right? But what we don't understand is innovation in a community and service context is fundamentally different than innovation in a business context, and I'll tell you why. One of the big reasons is that in a business context, if I innovate and create something new and you go out and buy it, there's my proof that this is something that's going to work, right? In a service delivery social context, the buyer of service and the user of service are not the same. So how many of you in your organizations are often in this tension where you're connected to community and community says, we need ABC. But your funder, often government or a foundation, says what we need is for you to help deliver X, Y, Z, right? And you're forever trying to hold that tension and find common ground across those two things. And one of the other things that we recognize is that we don't have and would really benefit from a more established infrastructure and set of funds exclusively dedicated to fostering this capacity within our organizations and our communities. So I'll give you an example. We at Tamarack we are now, as I talked about these national networks, we have a 5-year relationship with our federal government to work with 20 small rural and or Indigenous communities in every province of the country around the issue of youth success. Too many of our young people are not finishing high school and or if they are not progressing beyond there to post-secondary training, trades, or employment. And we don't understand how to help them. There are some really promising models that have been developed that work beautifully in urban contexts that do not translate well to a rural context. And so this is a 5-year experiment where Tamarack is sort of playing an intermediary role and working alongside 20 communities who are trying locally to bring these diverse perspectives around the same table to create a community-wide response to this issue. No more throwing the hot potato to education because it happens to involve youth, and the rest of us sitting back and saying, okay, fix it, and then evaluating how well they are doing. We all have a role to play, and we all have a responsibility to unite across the community to support our young people. That's what they're learning. But the most important thing, because this is a long term, you're not going to fix this overnight, but one of the most beautiful elements of this plan is that in addition to receiving core funding for 5 years for that collaborative infrastructure, that is necessary because our individual organizations don't have the bandwidth to pull everyone together, is that each year, every one of these communities has the opportunity to apply for a 1-year prototyping grant. It's beautiful because while the community is working on a long-term strategy, the broader community is getting impatient. You guys seem to have been talking for a long time, like not seeing anything happen on the ground. These prototype grants move, Megan and Sarah, you were talking yesterday, it's about moving forward. It's not perfection, right? It's good enough, keep going. That prototype grant is often an impetus for communities to try things. I just finished evaluating. So we've allocated 40 of these innovation grants across the 20 communities now. Only 28 of them have been completed. But you would be so inspired when you see the breadth, the diversity, the creativity that is emerging from these diverse communities. And what's even better is that the community's confidence that they can actually come together and make a meaningful difference is growing. The number of people who are coming out of the woodwork who may not be able to make a long-term commitment to sit on a leadership table are more than happy to get involved and contribute to a concrete action plan that's going to take place over a year. The other thing is that now, because we play an important role linking these communities together, is this great idea that's taken off in Manitoba is now being replicated in Newfoundland. Adapted for sure. But the thing about innovation is that we need to get better at scaling it up or sharing it out and having multiple groups adopt and adapt it, right? The other beautiful thing for the communities that are actually doing these innovation projects is that they now, on a very small scale, have concrete results. They understand the process and the project and what's needed. So when they go and approach another funder, it's not this vague, we want you to take a risk with us, because many funders can't do that. It's look what we did in one school. Look at the difference we made on this issue in one school. Imagine if we could do 5 schools, right? And the education system in our community, who's a partner, is so proud that they've been part of this new solution that suddenly they're saying, how do we get more of these? And the beauty of that is that you're moving the lion's share of the resource for addressing youth education is in those school systems. If we don't help get them investing in these new ideas after they've been proven, our little idea is going to struggle because it's not going to get enough fuel, and it's going to have to rely on ongoing grants. And what we want to do is embed it in our existing systems. Does that make sense? Okay, so the last piece I want to talk about is something that we at Tamarack are now just starting to make sense of, and that is our role. We aren't doing the work in local communities, but we recognize, and our communities tell us, that we are actually playing an invisible yet essential role to help the unique innovation in one community be accelerated and amplified, which absolutely increases the likelihood that collectively we will have a greater impact at the systems level. Does that make sense? So, one of the things that we think about when we talk about this notion is that a field catalyst role unites and weaves together the best of the wisdom that we're seeing in local communities and bridges it with the system leaders who are equally passionate about finding a new way, right? They think that they have to do this by telling the communities what to do, and that every community has to do the same thing, because that's the vantage point they have. What we help to do is animate and elevate the work that's already going on in communities in such a way that those system actors now see how they can further strengthen, eliminate barriers, and better invest in growing the wisdom and expertise of community. The catalyst, as we understand it from our own experience, plays 4 distinct and interconnected roles that we kind of fluidly move through. The first is we build relationship with those system level actors. We understand their pain points. We also understand the opportunities that will resonate with them around an issue. The second role we play is that we build capacity within local communities about how to mobilize for collective action with communities. The frameworks, the approaches, the tools to build that consensus and leadership in those local communities. The third equally important role is that we connect those local communities together. Remember, every one of these communities is trying something net new, right? They need the peer support of other communities wrestling through their same version of this issue, because they spark ideas off each other. The beauty is, if I'm going to try this innovative project that Manitoba did so beautifully in Newfoundland, I can say to my community leaders and my political leaders in my municipality, I'm not asking you to try something new. Manitoba's already done it. Look what they've done. Look what's happened. Oh, if Manitoba can do it, we can do it too, right? People need that confidence to step off the cliff. So the beauty, that's one piece. The other thing is, as the convener that makes it easy for these communities to come together and trade stories, they build relationships and trust with each other. because they're doing a unique kind of work that nobody else around them is typically doing. And people often locally look at them like, well, why aren't you just turning this into a program, right? They need each other. It's also a safe beta test audience. Well, we're thinking of doing this, but we're really stuck around that. Has anybody else faced that? How did you navigate it? What would you suggest? Here's our pitch. Is it good enough, right? You need those colleagues. The third thing we do is we see the patterns and themes. Great example, in our poverty work, 6 or 8 of our network of 25, 30 local plans to reduce poverty, we're experimenting with getting local business to commit to paying a living wage. They were each having different kinds of successes, so learning from each other was helpful, but they were now bumping into a roadblock, which is there were now national employers wanting to get on the bandwagon. But the problem is cost of living across the country varies dramatically. So to say a living wage in Canada is $23 isn't really true in some of our smaller rural communities relative to the, living in downtown Toronto. So what we did was we asked those 6 that were kind of leading it out, would they be part of a time-limited thought project where we brought together other experts, researchers, academics, and other poverty networks. And together we created an algorithm to calculate a living wage in a consistent and equitable way that used important data like cost of living, cost of property in a particular community, tax rates, whatever, so that everyone was confident that even if the dollar figure for a living wage spat out as being different, the methodology for how it was calculated was consistent and fair. Suddenly, it took off, right? The last piece, sorry, if I go back, the last role is to document and tell the stories of this innovation, share them across the network, far broader than that little group of 20, and most importantly, to tell those stories to the system level players, saying, listen, you don't have to do this. The locals have already figured it out. Look at what's happening. You want to help us? These are the kinds of shifts and changes and barriers that we're running into at a larger scale. How might you be able to fix it? And we're giving them the ammunition and the proof to make that easier to accomplish. So just to make it very concrete and real, as I said, we now are home to 4, one of them got cut off, 4 of these national networks of local groups. When we started our poverty work, we had 15 local communities doing poverty reduction strategies. That was 20 years ago. Now we have 300 across the country. Do you know how much easier it is to mobilize action around this issue when you can unite local communities within a province or within the country? When we started, not a single province had poverty reduction strategies. Now every province does. We also have a federal policy reduction strategy. So these are the lessons from our 20 years of doing this work. You can do it. You've got it. It's already happening here. So I just want to wrap up. I know I don't have a ton of time, but if there are comments or questions, I would really welcome any and all. Also insights, thoughts, perspectives. But don't everybody speak at once. Yes, go ahead. Do you want to come up while we're waiting for the mic? Or just speak loud and I can reiterate? Oh, here it comes. The roving mic. Thank you.
E te whānau mōrena. Ko te mihi nui, ko te mihi tuatai. Ka tahi to kōrero a tāhua nei. Whew. If I had known what my pātai yesterday, my question about te tiriti, was going to bring this morning, firstly, I just said hello. Secondly, I said, beautiful kōrero. Beautiful kōrero, kia mātou, ne, to all of us. As you know, Whaia, I am one of the consumers here. Context. Context is what I like. Right then, when you said that, empowered me. It totally empowered me. Content and context together, ne, is how it works. And I just wanted to say how much your kōrero has meant to me as one of those in the community that is here to celebrate this collaboration. Yes, I know that my pātai yesterday kind of ruffled people a little bit because we're all gathered here today and we're all working in unison. And it's like, why did you say that? But it is as a reminder. As a reminder, Nes, I spoke to my whanaunga, Nat, before, and I said, oh my goodness me, she has just said in a nutshell, in your reo, what te tiriti is. Te tiriti o Waitangi. Another aspect, co-governance, was all up there for us to see. Not just co-design of working together, content versus, or not even versus, context. Ka pai?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to celebrate you, Whaia, for your kōrero. It's been a long, hard journey for those of us that have walked this pathway to bring about the consumer voice to where we are here today in this room. Yes, 2008 to where I stand today has been a huge battle of getting that voice put out there. And look what you just did. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Where am I going with this?
Kia ora, great presentation. Given the 20 years of the changing political environment, what's been the Institute's risk strategy and mitigations to protect and preserve the program?
I think, sorry, let me go back. I think it's this. I think we need to be entrepreneurial. We need to stay agile. So part of it is, as a collaborative and as a network, we don't want to create an administrative monster we necessarily have to feed any more than necessary. And we need lots of allies. We cannot put all our eggs in one basket, one funder, because often in Canada, we don't have the rich network of foundations that the US is privileged to have. A lot of our funding for this work comes from levels of government. And so we need to have champions and investors from a number of different streams. In fact, at Tamarack, we have 3 dominant streams of funding we rely on. The first is long-term grants. The second is we generate our own revenue through consulting work and through consulting and events that we host, right? And we keep a lot of our stuff open source. That's like a principle, because everybody who's doing this work needs to be supported to do the work well. And that has been so enriching. You know, here is a perfect example. I am going home with so many great concrete examples of how you all are doing this work. And I know that some of the examples I will be taking back, communities across North America are really hungry for. So does that help? Like, it's very practical around that. I think, and really putting the needs of these local change makers as a guide for where we need to put our energy is another. So it's not easy. There's the short story. One of the things, though, that does give hope is, you know, that notion of a field catalyst? We aren't the only ones. This consulting monolith in the US that is well respected, the Bridgespan Group. They have committed a 3-year deep dive and learning journey to understand the unique contribution of a catalyst. Social Ventures Australia has done a similar piece of work around, they call it the field builder catalyst, and interestingly, their resources include a how-to guide for funders. And my friend Anjum in the audience today is one of a dynamic network here in Aotearoa who has written a beautiful piece of work that reflects frontline experience in working to change systems and have identified 5 pathways that are important to ensure this work continues. So I'd encourage you to learn from her wisdom as well. I know I'm out of time, but I am going to be around for the rest of the day, and please just come up. I'd love your questions and your insights. Thank you all very much.